Sarah Martinez had always been different from the other soldiers at Fort Davidson. While her fellow recruits were lean and muscular, she carried extra weight that made her the target of countless jokes and whispered comments. At 24, she stood barely 5 feet 4 inches tall, with a round face and soft curves that seemed out of place among the sharp angles and defined muscles of her peers. The Army had been her last hope after failing to find steady work in her small hometown of Cedar Falls. Her father, a retired veteran, had encouraged her to enlist, believing that military discipline might help her find direction in life. But from the moment she arrived at basic training, Sarah realized she had walked into a world where her appearance made her an outsider. Drill Sergeant Morrison never missed an opportunity to single her out during training exercises. "Martinez, move your ass. Christmas dinner isn't going to wait for you," he would shout as she struggled to keep up during morning runs. The other recruits would snicker, some openly mocking her huffing and puffing as she lagged behind the group. Despite the constant ridicule, Sarah possessed something that set her apart from everyone else, though few people knew about it. Growing up in rural Nebraska, she had learned to hunt with her grandfather, an old-timer who had taught her patience, precision, and the art of reading wind patterns and distances. By age 16, she could hit a target at 800 yards with remarkable consistency. Her grandfather used to say she had the gift, an almost supernatural ability to calculate trajectory, wind drift, and bullet drop in her head. But in the Army, nobody cared about her shooting skills during basic training. The focus was on physical fitness, following orders, and conforming to military standards. Sarah's marksmanship abilities remained hidden, overshadowed by her struggles with the physical demands of military life. The worst part wasn't even the official training. It was the social isolation that came with being different. In the mess hall, she often ate alone while groups of soldiers laughed and bonded over shared experiences she wasn't part of. During downtime, when others played cards or shared stories from home, Sarah would retreat to her bunk with a book, trying to ignore the occasional cruel comment about her appearance. Private Jackson, a tall, athletic soldier from California, seemed to take particular pleasure in making Sarah's life difficult. "Hey, Martinez," he called out one evening as she walked past a group of soldiers. "I heard they're serving seconds in the mess hall. Better hurry before it's all gone." His friends erupted in laughter, and Sarah felt her face burn with embarrassment. She never responded to these taunts, having learned long ago that fighting back only made things worse. Instead, she channeled her frustration into the one area where she could excel. During the limited shooting exercises they had, Sarah consistently scored among the highest marks, though even this achievement was dismissed by her peers. "Lucky shots," they would mutter, unable to believe that someone who looked like her could outshoot them. The turning point came during a particularly brutal week of training exercises. The unit was practicing urban warfare scenarios, and Sarah found herself paired with Jackson for a reconnaissance mission simulation. As they moved through the mock city setup, Jackson deliberately moved too fast, leaving Sarah behind and exposing their position to the opposing team. "Martinez, you're slowing us down," he hissed when they were quickly eliminated from the exercise. "Maybe if you spent less time at the chow hall and more time in the gym, you could keep up." That night, Sarah lay in her bunk fighting back tears of frustration. She had joined the Army hoping to prove herself, to find a place where her skills mattered more than her appearance. Instead, she felt more isolated than ever. She thought about quitting, about going home, and accepting that she wasn't cut out for military life. But something her grandfather had once told her kept echoing in her mind. "Sarah, the world will try to tell you what you can't do based on how you look. Don't you listen to them. When the moment comes, when it really matters, you show them what you're made of." As Christmas approached, the base buzzed with talk of holiday leave and family visits. Sarah had volunteered to stay behind, partly because she couldn't afford the trip home, but mostly because she didn't want to face her family's questions about how military life was treating her. She couldn't bring herself to admit that despite her excellent shooting scores, she was still seen as a joke by her fellow soldiers. Little did Sarah know that fate was about to present her with an opportunity to prove her worth in ways she never could have imagined. The quiet Christmas Eve ahead would soon turn into a night that would test every skill her grandfather had taught her, and show everyone at Fort Davidson exactly what kind of soldier she really was. The snow had begun to fall gently outside the barracks windows, and most of the base had settled into the peaceful quiet of Christmas Eve. Sarah sat on her bunk, cleaning her rifle, a habit she had developed not out of requirement, but because it reminded her of the countless hours she had spent with her grandfather, learning to respect and understand her weapon. She had no idea that in just a few hours, the skills that others dismissed and the determination they mocked would become the difference between life and death for an elite military unit trapped in hostile territory. The same soldiers who laughed at her weight and dismissed her abilities were about to discover that sometimes the most unlikely heroes emerge when the stakes are highest. The emergency alarm pierced the Christmas Eve silence at 2,147 hours, jolting every soldier on base from their holiday preparations. Sarah dropped her book and scrambled to her feet as red lights flashed throughout the barracks. Within minutes, the base transformed from peaceful holiday quiet to organized chaos as personnel rushed to their emergency stations. Colonel Harrison's voice crackled over the intercom system, urgent and commanding. All available personnel report to Briefing Room Alpha immediately. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill. Sarah quickly pulled on her uniform and grabbed her gear, joining the stream of soldiers hurrying toward the briefing room. The atmosphere was tense, filled with worried murmurs and speculation about what could have gone wrong on Christmas Eve. As she entered the packed briefing room, she noticed the grim expressions on the faces of the senior officers. Colonel Harrison stood at the front of the room, his weathered face reflecting the severity of the situation. Behind him, a large screen displayed a map of the mountainous region 50 miles north of the base. Red markers indicated hostile positions, while a single blue marker showed their objective. "Listen up, people," the colonel began, his voice cutting through the nervous chatter. At 1930 hours tonight, our elite Bravo team was deployed on a classified reconnaissance mission in the Blackstone Mountains. Their objective was to gather intelligence on suspected enemy weapons caches in the region. He clicked a remote, and the display changed to show aerial photographs of rugged terrain covered in snow and dense forest. At 2,130 hours, Bravo team's last communication indicated they had completed their primary mission, but were taking heavy fire from enemy forces. Their extraction helicopter was shot down, and ground support units are unable to reach their position due to severe weather conditions and hostile activity. A heavy silence fell over the room as the implications became clear. Sarah felt her heart racing as she looked at the impossible terrain displayed on the screen. The mountains were known for their treacherous weather and difficult accessibility, making any rescue operation extremely dangerous. Bravo team consists of 6 of our finest soldiers, Colonel Harrison continued. Captain Rodriguez, Staff Sergeant Thompson, Sergeant Williams, Corporal Davis, Specialist Chun, and Private First Class Murphy. They are currently pinned down in a valley approximately here. He pointed to a narrow canyon surrounded by steep cliffs and heavy forest cover. Intelligence suggests they are facing a well-armed enemy force of approximately 20 combatants who have taken defensive positions on the high ground surrounding the valley. Weather reports indicate a severe snowstorm moving into the area, which will make aerial support impossible for at least the next 12 hours. Major Stevens, the base operations officer, stepped forward to address the room. "We need a small, highly mobile team that can move through difficult terrain under cover of darkness. The mission parameters are simple, but extremely dangerous. Infiltrate the area, neutralize or suppress enemy forces, and extract our people before the storm hits." Sarah listened intently as the officers outlined the tactical situation. The enemy forces had positioned themselves strategically on elevated positions, giving them clear sight lines across the valley where Bravo team was trapped. Any direct assault would result in heavy casualties, and time was running out as the weather continued to deteriorate. "The terrain makes this mission particularly challenging," Major Stevens explained, clicking through several topographical images. "The approach routes are limited, and the enemy has likely set up overwatch positions to cover all obvious access points. We need soldiers who can move quietly through difficult terrain and engage targets at extended ranges." As the briefing continued, Sarah began to understand the true scope of the challenge. This wasn't just a rescue mission. It was a precision operation that would require exceptional marksmanship skills and the ability to operate independently in hostile territory. The kind of skills she had been developing since childhood, but had never been allowed to demonstrate in her military service. Lieutenant Parker, a young officer known for his tactical expertise, raised his hand. "Sir, what about drone support or artillery? Can we soften their positions before sending in ground forces?" Colonel Harrison shook his head grimly. "Negative. The weather has grounded our drone assets, and artillery support risks hitting our own people. The valley is too narrow, and we don't have precise locations for Bravo team's current positions. This has to be a surgical operation, precise, quiet, and effective." The room buzzed with nervous energy as soldiers processed the information. Everyone understood that this mission would be voluntary due to its extreme danger, and that whoever went would be facing overwhelming odds in terrible conditions. "I won't lie to you," the colonel said, his voice softening slightly. "This is one of the most dangerous missions we've ever undertaken. The soldiers who volunteer for this operation will be risking their lives to save their brothers and sisters in arms. But Bravo team has been there for all of us countless times, and we don't leave our people behind." Sarah felt something stirring inside her as she listened to the colonel's words. These weren't just fellow soldiers trapped in the mountains. They were people with families waiting for them at home, people who had probably shared the same kind of jokes and dismissive comments about her that she heard every day. But none of that mattered now. What mattered was that they needed help, and she might be one of the few people on base with the specific skills required for this type of mission. As the briefing concluded and officers began discussing volunteer assignments, Sarah made a decision that would change everything. Despite knowing that she would likely face skepticism and doubt from her superiors, she was determined to be part of this rescue operation. Her grandfather's training, the countless hours spent perfecting her marksmanship, and her intimate knowledge of difficult terrain might finally have a purpose beyond target range scores. The time had come to prove that sometimes the most unlikely soldiers possessed exactly the skills needed when lives hung in the balance. As the briefing room began to empty, soldiers clustering in small groups to discuss the dangerous mission ahead, Sarah took a deep breath and approached the front of the room where Colonel Harrison was speaking with his senior officers. Her heart pounded as she walked past several groups of elite soldiers, many of whom she knew would be the obvious choices for such a critical operation. "Sir," she said, her voice steady despite her nerves. "Private Martinez requesting permission to volunteer for the rescue mission." The conversation around the colonel stopped abruptly. Major Stevens looked up from the tactical maps with a mixture of surprise and skepticism. Lieutenant Parker, who had been reviewing terrain analysis, actually paused mid-sentence to stare at her. The silence that followed felt heavier than the Christmas snow falling outside. Colonel Harrison studied her for a long moment, his experienced eyes taking in her appearance and comparing it to the lean, muscular forms of the other volunteers who had already stepped forward. "Martinez," he said slowly, "this mission requires soldiers who can move quickly through extremely difficult terrain in harsh conditions. Are you certain you understand what we're asking?" The question stung, but Sarah had expected it. She straightened her shoulders and met the colonel's gaze directly. "Sir, I understand the requirements. I also understand that this mission will require precision long-range shooting in challenging conditions. My marksmanship scores consistently rank in the top 5% of all personnel on this base." Major Stevens glanced at a tablet in his hands, likely reviewing her service record. "Martinez, while your shooting scores are indeed excellent, this operation demands more than marksmanship. These soldiers will need to traverse nearly 15 miles of mountain terrain in snow and sub-zero temperatures, carry full gear loads, and maintain operational effectiveness throughout." Before Sarah could respond, Sergeant Turner, one of the base's most respected non-commissioned officers, spoke up from across the room. "Colonel, if I may," he said, approaching the group. "I've been Martinez's range instructor for the past 8 months. Her shooting ability isn't just excellent, it's exceptional. She can make shots that most of our best marksmen can't even attempt." The colonel looked intrigued but remained cautious. "Elaborate, Sergeant." "Sir, Last month, during advanced marksmanship training, Martinez successfully engaged targets at 1,200 yards in crosswind conditions that had other shooters missing by feet. She's got an intuitive understanding of ballistics that I've rarely seen. And she's consistently accurate under pressure. Lieutenant Parker frowned, clearly struggling with the idea. Sergeant, with all due respect, marksmanship is only part of the equation. This mission requires physical endurance and tactical mobility that what? Sarah interrupted, immediately regretting the breach in protocol, but pressing forward nonetheless. Sir, I grew up hunting in terrain similar to what we're facing tonight. I've spent countless hours moving through forests and mountains, tracking game in conditions that would challenge any soldier here. The room had grown quiet, with several other volunteers listening to the exchange with interest. Sarah knew this was her only chance to make her case, and she couldn't afford to hold back. Colonel, she continued, I understand that I don't look like your typical special operations soldier. But this mission isn't about conforming to expectations. It's about bringing home 6 soldiers who are running out of time. The enemy has the high ground, which means our people need someone who can engage targets from extreme range with absolute precision. Someone who can make impossible shots in terrible conditions. Major Stevens consulted his tablet again, scrolling through what appeared to be training records. Martinez, your physical fitness scores are adequate, but they don't suggest the kind of endurance this mission will require. Sarah felt her frustration mounting, but she forced herself to remain calm. Sir, fitness scores measure one type of physical capability. They don't measure the ability to remain motionless in a sniper position for hours, or the mental discipline required to make a perfect shot when lives depend on it. They don't measure the kind of endurance that comes from spending entire days tracking elk through mountain terrain. Sergeant Turner stepped forward again, clearly supporting her argument. Colonel, I've seen Martinez demonstrate capabilities that don't show up in standard fitness evaluations. During a recent training exercise, she maintained a shooting position for over 4 hours in freezing rain, hitting targets consistently while other soldiers were shivering too hard to aim properly. The colonel looked around the room at the other volunteers, all of them physically impressive soldiers with proven track records in conventional military operations. But, as Sarah watched his expression, she could see him weighing the unique requirements of this particular mission against traditional military expectations. This isn't a conventional assault, Sarah pressed, sensing an opportunity. The enemy expects us to send our biggest, strongest, fastest soldiers. They're prepared for a direct confrontation with elite forces. But a lone sniper, someone who can approach undetected and eliminate targets from positions they don't expect, that might be our best chance. Captain Morrison, who had been silent throughout the exchange, suddenly spoke up. Colonel, I've been reviewing the tactical situation. The terrain analysis shows several potential sniper positions that could provide overwatch for the entire valley. If we could place a skilled marksman in any of those positions, they could potentially suppress or eliminate enemy forces while a smaller extraction team moves in. The colonel studied the maps again, then looked back at Sarah with new interest. Martinez, if we were to consider your participation in this mission, you would be operating primarily as a sniper. You would need to reach an elevated position, possibly alone, and provide cover fire for the extraction team. Are you prepared for that level of responsibility? Sarah felt her pulse quicken, but her voice remained steady. Yes, sir. Absolutely. The weather conditions are deteriorating rapidly, Major Stevens added. Visibility will be limited, wind speeds are increasing, and temperatures are dropping below zero. These are not ideal conditions for precision shooting. Sir, Sarah replied, my grandfather taught me to hunt in Nebraska winters. I've made successful shots in conditions similar to what we'll face tonight. Wind and cold affect ballistics in predictable ways if you know how to compensate. The colonel was quiet for a long moment, weighing the unconventional proposal against the desperate circumstances they faced. Finally, he turned to Sergeant Turner. What's your honest assessment, Sergeant? Can she do what she's claiming? Sergeant Turner didn't hesitate. Sir, if this mission requires someone to make impossible shots in terrible conditions, Martinez might be our best option. I've never seen anyone with her natural ability to read environmental factors and adjust accordingly. As the officers continued their discussion, Sarah realized that she was closer to joining this critical mission than she had ever imagined possible. All the ridicule, all the dismissive comments about her appearance, all the time she had been overlooked, none of that mattered now. What mattered was whether she could help bring home 6 soldiers who were counting on their fellow service members to risk everything for their rescue. The decision that came next would determine not only whether she would participate in the most dangerous mission of her military career, but also whether she would finally have the opportunity to prove that heroism comes in many forms. Colonel Harrison studied the tactical maps one final time before making his decision. The weight of command pressed heavily on his shoulders as he considered the unconventional request before him. 6 elite soldiers were trapped in increasingly desperate circumstances, and time was running out with each passing minute. "Martinez," he said finally, "you'll be part of the mission. But understand this, you'll be assigned as the primary Overwatch sniper. Your job will be to reach this position here." He pointed to a ridge approximately 800 meters from the enemy positions, and provide precision fire support for the extraction team. Sarah felt a surge of adrenaline mixed with profound responsibility. "Yes, sir. I understand. The extraction team will consist of 4 soldiers: Staff Sergeant Brooks, Corporal Kim, Private Johnson, and Private Anderson. They're experienced in close-quarters combat and extraction operations. Your job is to eliminate or suppress enemy positions that threaten their approach, and the evacuation of Bravo Team." Major Stevens handed Sarah a detailed topographical map marked with known enemy positions, possible approach routes, and the suspected location of the trapped soldiers. "Martinez, you'll need to reach your position undetected and establish Overwatch before the extraction team begins their approach. Weather reports show we have maybe 3 hours before conditions become completely impossible." As Sarah studied the map, she began calculating distances, wind patterns, and potential shooting solutions in her head. The enemy had positioned themselves cleverly, with overlapping fields of fire that would make any direct assault extremely costly. But from the ridge position the colonel had indicated, she would have clear sight lines to most of their defensive positions. "Equipment check," Sergeant Turner announced, leading Sarah to the armory where specialized gear was being prepared for the mission. "You'll be carrying the M24 sniper system with night vision scope, cold weather modifications, and approximately 200 rounds of match-grade ammunition." The rifle felt familiar and reassuring in Sarah's hands as she checked the action and began adjusting the scope settings. She had trained extensively with the M24 system, and it had become as natural to her as breathing. The cold weather modifications were essential. In sub-zero temperatures, even small changes in metal expansion could affect accuracy at extreme ranges. "You'll also carry standard cold weather gear, emergency medical supplies, and communication equipment," Sergeant Turner continued, helping her organize the equipment. "Your total load will be approximately 60 pounds, and you'll need to cover nearly 10 miles of difficult terrain to reach your position." Private Johnson, one of the extraction team members, approached as Sarah completed her equipment check. She recognized him as one of the soldiers who had often joined in the jokes about her appearance during training. His expression now was serious and professional, focused entirely on the mission ahead. "Martinez," he said, "I want you to know that the extraction team is counting on your marksmanship tonight. We'll be exposed during the approach, and your cover fire might be the only thing keeping us alive." The sincerity in his voice struck Sarah more than any apology could have. This wasn't about past grievances or hurt feelings. This was about soldiers depending on each other when everything was on the line. "You can count on me," she replied simply. As the teams made final preparations for departure, Sarah found herself experiencing a strange combination of nervousness and calm confidence. The nervous energy came from the magnitude of what they were attempting and the knowledge that 6 lives depended on their success. The confidence came from years of training and deep understanding of her own capabilities with a rifle. The convoy departed Fort Davidson at 2,230 hours, with 2 all-terrain vehicles carrying the rescue team through increasingly treacherous mountain roads. Snow continued to fall steadily, and the temperature had dropped to -8 degrees Fahrenheit. Radio chatter was minimal, with each team member focused on the challenges ahead. During the 40-minute drive to the insertion point, Sarah reviewed the tactical plan repeatedly. She would separate from the extraction team approximately 2 miles from the target area and approach her overwatch position from the north, using a steep ravine to mask her movement. The extraction team would approach from the south, timing their assault to begin precisely 30 minutes after she confirmed her position. The most critical aspect of the plan was communication. Sarah would have direct radio contact with both the extraction team and base command, allowing her to coordinate fire support and provide real-time intelligence about enemy movements. Her success or failure in eliminating key enemy positions could determine whether the entire mission succeeded or became a tragic failure. As they reached the insertion point, a small clearing in the forest about 5 miles from the target area, Sarah felt the familiar pre-mission focus that her grandfather had taught her years ago. Every sense became heightened. Every detail of her surroundings registered with crystal clarity. This was the state of mind that had made her such an effective hunter, and now it would be put to the ultimate test. "Remember," Staff Sergeant Brooks said as the teams prepared to separate, "we have a narrow window of opportunity. Weather conditions are deteriorating rapidly, and intelligence suggests the enemy may be planning to relocate Bravo Team to a more secure location. We get one chance to do this right." Sarah adjusted her pack, checked her rifle one final time, and looked toward the dark mountain terrain she would need to traverse alone. The snow was falling more heavily now, which would provide concealment for her movement, but would also affect visibility and shooting conditions. "Martinez," Colonel Harrison's voice came through her radio earpiece. "Command is monitoring your progress. You have tactical authority to engage targets as needed to support the mission. Trust your training and bring our people home." As she began her solitary approach through the forest, Sarah thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. All the doubts, all the criticism, all the time she had questioned whether she belonged in the military, none of that mattered now. What mattered was the training her grandfather had given her, the countless hours she had spent perfecting her craft, and the 6 soldiers who needed her to be perfect when it counted most. The wind picked up as she moved deeper into the mountains, carrying with it the promise of the severe weather that would soon make any rescue attempt impossible. Time was running out, and everything depended on her ability to reach her position undetected and execute the most important shots of her life. Behind her, the extraction team was beginning their own dangerous approach, counting on her to clear the way for their assault. Ahead of her lay the most challenging shooting scenario she had ever faced, with conditions that would test every skill she possessed. But, for the first time since joining the Army, Sarah felt completely confident in her abilities. This was what she had been trained for, what she had been preparing for her entire life. Tonight, she would finally show everyone what she was truly capable of accomplishing. Sarah moved through the forest with the silent precision her grandfather had taught her during countless hunting expeditions. Each step was deliberate and calculated, her boots finding solid purchase on snow-covered rocks and fallen logs while avoiding branches that might snap and reveal her position. The 40-pound pack felt manageable despite the difficult terrain, her years of outdoor experience serving her well in conditions that would challenge most soldiers. The snowfall continued to intensify as she climbed toward her designated overwatch position, but, rather than hindering her progress, it provided perfect concealment for her movement. Through her night vision scope, she could see the heat signatures of enemy sentries positioned along the valley rim, exactly where intelligence had predicted they would establish their defensive perimeter. After 90 minutes of careful movement, Sarah reached the rocky outcropping that would serve as her shooting position. The location provided an elevated view of the entire valley, with clear sight lines to most of the enemy positions. More importantly, the natural rock formation would mask her muzzle flash and provide protection from return fire. She established her shooting position methodically, exactly as she had been trained. The bipod legs were adjusted for the proper angle, sandbags positioned to provide stable support, and her scope settings verified for the current environmental conditions. The wind was gusting from the northwest at approximately 12 miles per hour, with occasional stronger gusts that would require real-time adjustments for long-range shots. "Overwatch in position," she whispered into her radio microphone. "I have visual on multiple enemy positions, counting at least 15 heat signatures distributed across the valley rim." "Copy, Overwatch," came Staff Sergeant Brooks' voice through her earpiece. Extraction team is beginning final approach. We're approximately 20 minutes from your position. Through her scope, Sarah could see the trapped Bravo team members huddled behind improvised cover in the valley below. They appeared to be in a shallow depression near the wreckage of their downed helicopter, with enemy forces positioned in a rough semicircle on the higher ground around them. The tactical situation was even worse than the briefing had suggested. The enemy had established interlocking fields of fire that would make any rescue attempt extremely dangerous. As she studied the enemy positions, Sarah began identifying priority targets. 2 machine gun positions dominated the approaches that the extraction team would need to use. A sniper team was positioned on the eastern ridge, with a clear view of the trapped soldiers' position. Several rifle teams were scattered along the valley rim, providing overlapping coverage of any potential escape routes. Her first shot would be critical. Once she opened fire, the enemy would know that rescue forces were in the area and would likely become more aggressive in their attacks on the trapped team. She needed to eliminate the most dangerous threats quickly and efficiently while providing the extraction team with clear approach routes. Overwatch, this is command. Colonel Harrison's voice came through her radio. Weather update shows severe conditions moving in faster than predicted. You have maybe 90 minutes before visibility becomes zero and extraction becomes impossible. The pressure was mounting, but Sarah felt the familiar calm that came over her during critical shooting situations. Her breathing slowed and steadied as she settled into her shooting position, becoming one with her rifle and scope. Everything her grandfather had taught her about patience, precision, and reading environmental conditions was now focused on the most important shots of her life. Through her scope, she could see the extraction team moving carefully through the forest toward their assault positions. They were still several minutes away from being ready to begin their approach, which gave her time to plan her shooting sequence carefully. The enemy sniper on the eastern ridge would be her first target. He posed the greatest threat to both the trapped team and the approaching rescuers. The range was 847 meters according to her rangefinder, with a slight crosswind that would push the bullet approximately 6 inches to the left. She made the necessary adjustments to her scope and settled into her final shooting position. Extraction team, this is Overwatch, she whispered. I'm engaging priority targets in 30 seconds. Be prepared to move on my signal. Her crosshairs settled on the enemy sniper, who was completely unaware of her presence. Through the scope, she could see him adjusting his own rifle, likely preparing to engage the trapped Bravo team members. Sarah controlled her breathing, waiting for the natural respiratory pause that would provide the steadiest shooting platform. The shot broke with perfect surprise, exactly as her grandfather had taught her. Through her scope, she watched the enemy sniper collapse, eliminated by a single perfectly placed round. Before his body had even settled, she was already transitioning to her second target, the machine gun position on the northern ridge. The machine gun crew had heard the suppressed gunshot, but couldn't determine its origin in the swirling snow. They were scanning the wrong direction when Sarah's second shot eliminated the gunner, causing the crew to abandon their position in confusion. Overwatch to extraction team, she transmitted. Primary threats eliminated. You have a clear approach from the north. Move now. As the extraction team began their final assault, Sarah continued engaging targets with mechanical precision. Each shot was calculated and deliberate, taking into account wind conditions, range, and the need to avoid hitting friendly forces who were now moving through the combat area. The enemy forces, realizing they were under attack from a highly skilled sniper, began attempting to locate and suppress her position. Rifle fire began impacting the rocks around her position, but the combination of darkness, falling snow, and her excellent concealment made her nearly impossible to spot. Within 15 minutes, the extraction team had reached the trapped Bravo team members and begun moving them toward the evacuation route. But the enemy was now fully alert and attempting to block their escape with concentrated fire from the remaining positions. Sarah continued providing overwatch, eliminating threats as they appeared and keeping escape routes clear for the evacuation. Her ammunition supply was running low, but each remaining round was used with maximum efficiency. All teams, this is command. Colonel Harrison's voice crackled through the radio. Weather window is closing fast. You have maybe 20 minutes before conditions become impossible. The evacuation was proceeding, but slowly due to the wounded condition of some Bravo team members. Sarah could see enemy forces attempting to reposition and cut off the escape route. She had maybe a dozen rounds remaining and needed to make each one count. Her final series of shots were the most challenging of the night. Long-range engagements in deteriorating visibility against targets that were actively trying to avoid her fire. But years of training and natural ability combined to make her nearly unstoppable. Each shot found its mark, clearing the path for her fellow soldiers to escape. Overwatch, this is Extraction Team. Staff Sergeant Brooks' voice came through her earpiece. All Bravo team members recovered and moving to evacuation point. Outstanding work. You saved all our lives tonight. As Sarah began her own withdrawal from the Overwatch position, she felt a profound sense of accomplishment mixed with exhaustion. The mission had been successful. All 6 trapped soldiers were safe and heading home for Christmas. More importantly, she had proven to herself and everyone else that heroism had nothing to do with appearance and everything to do with skill, determination, and courage when it mattered most. The ride back to Fort Davidson was quiet, with exhausted soldiers processing the events of the night. But as they arrived at the base and began debriefing the mission, Sarah noticed something had fundamentally changed. The same soldiers who had mocked her appearance and questioned her abilities now looked at her with genuine respect and admiration. Colonel Harrison pulled her aside as the debriefing concluded. "Martinez," he said, "what you accomplished tonight was extraordinary. Your marksmanship and tactical awareness saved 7 lives under the most challenging conditions imaginable." Private Johnson, who had been part of the extraction team, approached her as she prepared to return to her quarters. "Martinez," he said quietly, "I owe you an apology. We all do. Tonight you showed us what a real soldier looks like, and it has nothing to do with what we see on the surface." As Sarah walked back to her barracks in the early morning light of Christmas Day, she thought about her grandfather and the lessons he had taught her about patience, precision, and never giving up on yourself even when others doubt your abilities. The ridicule and dismissive comments would probably continue, but they would never again have the power to make her question her own worth. She had proven that sometimes the most unlikely heroes emerge when the stakes are highest, and that true strength comes not from conforming to others' expectations, but from developing your unique talents and being ready to use them when lives depend on your courage and skill. The Christmas snow continued to fall gently on Fort Davidson, but for Sarah Martinez, it was the beginning of a new chapter in her military career, one where she would be known not for how she looked, but for what she could accomplish when it mattered most.